Thanks for joining us today. I've got a fair bit to get through, so I might jump straight into my presentation. My presentation is just going through some insights that I've seen working with private schools and not-for-profits and charities over the last 25 years. So that's what the presentation's about. So in terms of governance, I've seen lots of different types of governance structures at schools. Some are effective, some are not so. And the structure of governance at a school, whether they've got just a single board or they've got committees to support that can have a big impact on the effectiveness of the school. And the other thing with governance is that obviously if it's ineffective, there's a few different things that may need to change, all of which take time and cost money to fix. But it could be that you need to recruit new board members and committee members. It may be that you've got to restructure your model. You might not have a finance committee or an audit and risk committee and be placing too much pressure on the board to do those roles as well. It may be that you need to develop a board charter or a committee charter so that the ground rules are set so that the governance isn't getting bogged down in operational matters and are focused more on strategic matters and oversight, which is really their role. And the other thing that I've seen from time to time is that there's often changes in legislation or best practice, and constitutions can get outdated. So another good thing to be doing is to periodically have your constitutions reviewed by someone who's a specialist lawyer in that space working with schools. So that's another good thing just to be doing every so often. So just touching on issues that I've seen from time to time, whether it be in schools or not-for-profits, in the governance space. So obviously it's important to make sure that you've got representation on the board from the key stakeholders. You can't obviously represent all stakeholders, but it's important to make sure that there is representation from the parents, the staff, maybe a religious body or other key stakeholders in the school, and so that they do feel like they've got a voice at the boardroom table. As I mentioned before, obviously constitutions can get outdated, so the other thing that is good is just to get those regularly reviewed. Board member maximum terms. So I've seen situations where there's been constitutions where they don't have a maximum term for the board, and you have situations where board members have been there for quite some time. Obviously you don't have a situation where there's board members that are changing the whole board basically every year. Obviously that's distracting to the board to be having to induct new board members all the time, but there needs to be that balance. You also don't want to lose the IP that may sit on a board, but it's a trade-off between having new blood and new ideas coming through to bring to the board versus having obviously that IP and not being distracted. So yeah, it's about getting that right balance, but it's important to make sure you've got a constitution that supports it, a constitution that has fixed terms so that people aren't there forever and may get stale and then be not necessarily challenging management and being engaged at board level. So that's important. The other thing that's important is to have obviously financial oversight. It's one of the important parts of a board. The days of leaving the financial oversight just to the treasurer are gone, or a select few that have the financial expertise on the board. You need to make sure that there's a collective responsibility shared by everyone on the board and finance committees to have that financial oversight. So I know when about 10 years ago when there was the Centro Properties case, which some of you may remember, what came out of that is that everyone needs to have a base level minimum financial literacy, and it's not acceptable just to leave it to a handful of people on the board. You all need to have enough knowledge to be dangerous, to challenge management, to ask questions. You don't need to be experts, but you need to know enough to ask questions. And so that's important. If you've got board members who maybe don't have that financial literacy, then it's important to get that training or induction processes within the board. I know I had one example of a not-for-profit, and their rule was anyone who was joining the board couldn't join the board until they'd done a one-day Institute of Directors course, so that at least when they did start on the board, they could hit the ground running and be really effective from day one. Skills mix, obviously, not all schools have a parent group that may have all the skills that are required to run a school. Obviously, schools are becoming bigger and more complex and have obviously large risks attached to them. So what I've seen with some schools, they're really moving to a more corporate style board structure where they're actually identifying the skills that they want to have on the board and going and seeking out those people to fill those roles, whether it be marketing, legal, finance, education and curriculum, or religion, and they're making sure that they've got all representation of all those skill sets on the board. If your parent group may not have access to those skill sets, there's quite a few resources out there these days which you can go to try and recruit new board members. Obviously, tapping into your school alumni would be good because they've got that history and background of the school and a connection and engagement with the school, but sometimes that's not possible. So even things like LinkedIn, Institute of Company Directors, ethical jobs, there's a few different ones. Better Boards, I think, is another one, and also the accounting bodies as well, if you're looking for someone maybe with some financial acumen. So there are quite a few places you can look for directors if you're looking to fill a particular skill set. Board size, so it's probably a matter of, with boards, of not having a board that's too big and maybe unwieldy and difficult to make efficient decisions, and not having a board that's too small and therefore putting too much pressure on too few, or maybe not representing enough of the key stakeholders, or not having the appropriate skill mix. So it's about trying to get that right balance, and also making sure that you've got a constitution that allows that right number of board members. The other thing which we still see from time to time is managing conflicts. So, oops, how do I go back? Managing conflicts. So obviously a lot of people take this for granted, but I still do see from time to time situations where there's board decisions being made and they haven't properly managed that process. So obviously you need to have people declaring conflicts of interest, having a conflict register, and if there's any uncertainty around conflicts, it's better to err on the side of being conservative and not be involved in those decision-making situations, because it could be that you think that you've covered off on a conflict, but there's a perception in the school community and you don't want to be seen to be conflicted in making decisions. The next one's around ACNC governance standards. So all schools are registered charities under the ACNC as well, and therefore they need to comply with the ACNC governance standards, and they're often not widely discussed, and so some schools aren't aware of their obligations under those standards. Given my time for my presentation, I won't go through what the standards are, but we'll include a link in our slides as to where you can find those standards. So I guess my advice, particularly to boards, is, and I don't think you need to do it every year, but every couple of years it would make sense. There's a really good self-assessment checklist on the ACNC website, and as a board you can go through and make sure you are complying. A lot of it's fairly common sense, and it is very broad, like they're not prescriptive in how they define the standards, but I think it is good governance and good practice to be going through that checklist.
Ryan, sorry to interrupt. We will share these slides with you after the presentation, so if you're frantically trying to write anything down, we're happy to share these afterwards.
Yeah, good point. Risk management. So obviously what I'm seeing out there is that compliance and risk management seems to be a really growing burden and growing cost for schools. Obviously there's enormous risk if you get it wrong, but I think what you need to do is be developing a risk management culture within the school, so it's not just left up to one or two people or a couple of people on the board, and that everyone's contributing to sort of managing risk. So some of the things that I've seen that maybe some schools and not-for-profits aren't probably doing well is they're not really defining their risk appetite, so what level of sort of forecasting what level of risk that they're prepared to accept, and also their risk tolerance, so they've got something to measure against in terms of actual risk, so they can better manage their risk. So I think it's important to understand and have a consensus at board level as to what risk you're prepared to accept. And I would imagine that most schools would be very conservative, given they're working with students and families, and obviously there's a lot of risk there. So. But I think it's good to be documenting that as part of your risk management process. The other thing that schools need to be doing is, obviously risk management is an evolving thing, and you need to be constantly updating your risks. There's quite a few risk registers I saw last year, not just in the school sector, but where there was nothing mentioned about COVID, and obviously COVID's a big risk, and they hadn't got to the stage of documenting and explaining how they were going to manage those risks, and I think you need to be on top of that at all times. The other thing is, it's not just about allocating risk to one particular person, like you've got a compliance or a risk manager within the school and that's their job. It needs to be a shared collaborative approach where people are identifying risks throughout the school, feeding those back to someone who's sort of managing them, but also it's a shared responsibility to come up with ideas as to how they can be best mitigated. I know of one example that I've heard of where they had this really nice piece of software that documented all the risks, and if someone identified a risk, it'd shoot it off to this particular person who would then address the risk, but that person didn't have authority to do anything about the risk and didn't have the resources to address the risk as well, and so it was a bit of a pointless system. So you need to make sure that you've got the right levels of authority and right resources in place to actually address things as they come up. Teaching mix. So the mix of teaching experience can have an impact not just on teaching outcomes but also financial results. So obviously there's a bit of a trade-off. New teachers can bring the latest ideas and teaching methods and sort of fresh energy, but obviously there's a perception out there that experienced teachers are often perceived as providing better teaching outcomes on occasions, and so it's about having a bit of a trade-off. What we tend to see is that teachers tend to find a school that they like and they'll stay there for a long time. So you have a lot of teachers with really long tenures at a school, and the financial impacts on that, which sometimes get overlooked, are that if you've got a low churn of teaching staff, then you've got a lot of very experienced teachers that cost a lot more to pay, and on top of that, the higher wages and salaries then and longer terms means you've got a higher long service leave liability, which we'll touch on a bit further on. So obviously having some level of turnover of staff, particularly teaching staff, is not necessarily a bad thing, as long as you can balance that up with the impacts that you may have on the teaching outcomes, because obviously that's important as well. The other just insight that I've seen in the last sort of 5 to 10 years is a bit of a trend that there's a lot more teaching aids in schools, and I'm not sure whether that your stats back that up, but There's a lot more students out there with special needs and a lot more teaching aids, and that obviously adds to the cost of teaching as well. Recruitment. So obviously in the next 5 to 10 years there's going to be an enormous group of baby boomers that are going to be retiring from the sector, and probably going to be more demand on replacing teachers than ever before. And so we expect that there's going to be a teacher shortage as a result of that, and so schools are going to need to be really innovative in how they recruit and retain the best talent, because there's going to be obviously a talent war for good teachers. So I think this is really just an idea around sort of starting to think about how you can place yourself in the recruitment market and have a point of difference maybe from other schools to try and retain and recruit the best talent. Capital works. So a lot of parents feel, from what I've heard, feel like they pay really good money for school fees, and there's that expectation of that they're going to have good facilities, and there's going to be continuous investment in those facilities. So what we're seeing is that there's the cost of capital works is high and is growing, and that obviously has impact on cash flow management. So the other thing we're seeing is that there seems to be less government funding out there for capital works, unless you're in a high need area. It may be that there's rapid population growth in your area, and therefore you might be able to get access to government funding, but we're seeing less government funding in capital works now than we did a few years ago. The other thing that we're seeing is that less success from grant applications where schools are profitable, because governments are saying, well, you should be able to fund that out of your own cash flow. So schools have got surplus cash, that's great, but some schools don't necessarily have that and need to put the funding into capital works so that they can build the buildings to house the enrolment growth. So in those cases, they need to borrow the funds for the capital works. So yeah, just a matter of making sure that there's that cash flow management, and that's factored into your budgeting and so forth. So at Ashfords we've got a new division in finance and lending, and they're happy to work with schools if they can to help them with their finance needs. So happy to make an introduction if need be. Revenue model. So I'm sure you're all aware of the revenue model, but obviously over the last 3 years there's been a transition from the old SES model to what they call direct method of income model, DMI. And so the big change there is the SES model was more around the median income for a particular area where you're generating your students from, whereas now it's more targeted at the actual income of the parents at your school. And so obviously the upshot there is that can create more of a fluctuation in revenue from year to year, because the model can change based on your parent group from one year to the next. So I guess it's a matter of having that flexibility in your modelling for your budgets moving forward. The other part of revenue is around the loadings. Some schools have access to loadings which compensate them for what they call educational disadvantage, and it could be size of school. Smaller schools tend to get a bit more funding. They get a loading for that. Maybe that they're in a remote area, or it may be that they're in a low socioeconomic area, or they've got students with disability, or a lot of students which English isn't their first language, or Indigenous students. So all of those different loadings provide additional income to the school. So particularly with something like students with disability, we've seen where there can be real fluctuation in numbers at schools, and it's important to make sure you've got someone that's monitoring that regularly, because you don't want to be in a situation where your numbers of students with disability changes rapidly from one census to the next, and you're in a situation where you might have to you've overestimated or you've got to repay funds to the government. So you just need to make sure that that's a really well managed process. So that's my insight there. Long service leave. So most schools that we see have got a really large long service leave liability, and that sort of probably goes back to my point earlier about teachers finding a school and staying there. And so it's large and it is growing exponentially. So having talked to some schools, they often find that teachers find it really hard to find a suitable time to take leave, particularly those that may be teaching VCE and they don't want it to adversely impact on the results or the educational outcomes of students. So it can be really tricky to find a suitable time for them to take leave. And there's also some teaching staff that may want to retain their long service leave until they retire, almost like a bonus extra bonus when they retire. So all of that means that there's a growing long service leave liability, and obviously that's provided for in the financial statements, but with a lot of, we're forecasting obviously that there's a lot of baby boomers that will be leaving this sector in the next 5 to 10 years. So obviously schools need to make sure that they're not just providing for it in the financial statements, but they're also starting to think about having the cash set aside. And I guess the question I've got there is, are you starting to model over the next sort of 3 to 5 years who is likely to be retiring and what the liability might be, and whether you've got sufficient cash flow set aside for that? So it's probably something that hasn't been a big issue up until now, but as there starts to be an increased number of retirements, I think it's going to be a bigger cash flow impact on schools. Forecasting and benchmarking. So most schools are good at producing forecasts and benchmarking, and obviously they're doing that in a timely manner to make sure that they've done their budgets prior to their invoicing of terms fees for the next year. So that's all good. Some of the things I'm not seeing though is they'll prepare a budget and that's the only scenario. I think good budgeting, there should be a few different scenarios. Like, you don't obviously have to go silly and do a whole heap of scenarios, but just the ones that are reasonably likely. And so I think that it's good practice to have a couple of different scenarios. What happens if you lose, 5% of your enrolments, or what happens if you gain enrolments and you've got to put on more staff and maybe you've got some capital works required to build classrooms or whatever. So I think that you need to incorporate a few different scenarios. So that's all I'd say about forecasting. Benchmarking, obviously John will talk about that, but I just think it's good governance to be looking at trends year on year, but also comparisons with other schools. So that's all I'll say about that. I won't steal John's thunder. So as you can see from my discussion, we've got a lot of experience in private schools. We like working with private schools, and if anyone's looking for a fresh perspective or would like to have a chat about their audit requirements, happy to have a chat. So any questions?
Just one other additional cost on long service leave. The trend, and it has been for some time now, is that teachers finish teaching and take their long service leave, and you put aside for long service leave. But what's not put aside for is the fact you still have to pay them their school holidays. And if they take it at half pay or over more than 1 year, it's just additional cost for the school.
So they're getting free holidays effectively.
Yep.
Yeah. So there's a lot of teachers doing that.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's been going for years.
Yeah. And there's nothing really to stop them doing it.
No.
Yeah. It's just you need to factor that into your cash flow. No, it's a good point though. Any other questions?
Right, James from Second, I'm the Director of Business. Just got a question in terms of your, you talked about the risk management. You talked about appetite. School have to decide what sort of appetite we have, because there's so many risks,
Oh, I know, yes.
So can you just elaborate a little bit how actually help us actually decide?
Well, I think you need to apply appetite to categories, I think, classes of risk, because obviously anything to do with students, you're going to have a very low appetite to risk. But maybe there's other areas where maybe it is acceptable to have some risk, but whether that be maybe a school's got a foundation with an investment portfolio and they're happy to have some more risk to get a better return on investment. So yeah, I can't speak specifically to your school, but I think you need to categorise it into the different types of risk, because anything to do with students, I would imagine that pretty much every school, their appetite is basically nil to nil risk. So yeah, that's my thought. I've got some things I could send you on risk appetite and risk tolerance. So yeah.
Thank you.
Right. In your opinion, should schools have something like a commerce committee, a committee that explores new business ventures such as childcare, commercial swimming pool, partnerships with other businesses and community organisations, a committee that looks at maximising investment and property income, or is that all under the finance committee or somewhere else?
I mean, you could have like a business development committee if you wanted to. I think it depends on whether you're overloading the finance committee and whether the finance committee's got the skill set to assist with that, because if it could quite easily fit into the remit of the finance committee, but I think it just depends on whether you've got other people and they're probably more suited to that but don't want to be involved in the financial decisions, and maybe you would have a separate business development committee. But yeah, it depends on your school and what resources you've got available to sort of help in that, because it's a good idea.
Trevor, our Director of Ashfords Digital, is now going to talk. And it seems to be a theme about how to understand and what we can do to make getting through that data easier and gaining insight. So, where you go, Trevor?
Where I go. Yeah, so you're hearing data, and you're going, oh, there's so much data, and how do I analyse it? We've been doing a fair bit of work over the last, well, in at Ashford 3 years, but I've been working in this space for nearly 7 years, working within Power BI and trying to understand how to use Power BI. And the basic question is, nobody knows what it is. And so they get told, Power BI is really cool, and everybody goes, I don't really know what it is and what I can do with it. So what the objective of today is to give you a better understanding of that, then to understand and get you a better understanding of how you start the journey into Power BI and into your data. Because just going in and building a Power BI dashboard is not going to give you instantly the questions and the answers that you need to have. You need to go back to, in John's reports, understand the ratios you're looking for, understand the information so that we can build the models to work within that. But it's beyond that. So let's firstly, who is using Power BI at the moment? Yeah, one? Only one? Yeah, two? Who of your school do you use Microsoft products? Microsoft 365, Teams, Office, everybody's 100% on that? Just because if you're not, then yeah, just phase out because you can't use Power BI. Well, you can, but it doesn't really sort of work together. So it's a Microsoft product. It's an intelligence platform that provides you with the tools to aggregate and analysing and visualising and sharing data. So the big thing that John said before is, I don't know if you picked up on it, he said, some people, and I thought, well, accountants like looking at numbers, and other people like looking at graphs. You don't know who they are, right? So I would have thought John would love numbers, and he just said he likes graphs because it helps him understand it. And it's about that visualization. It's about grabbing that information so that it helps you understand what it is, but more importantly, educates. So this is this whole form of educating what the information is. So it connects to a range of data sources, and I'm going to go into that in a bit more later, but effectively anything that's data we can plug into Power BI and we can connect them together. And I'm going to show you how that works and what we've got to do in the background so that you can understand that a bit more. But what it does, it brings everything to life. So it brings your whole dashboard, it brings it all alive for you, and you can easily see what's going on. And then we're going to have a look at a demo of a Power BI dashboard, just some examples of, so you can see how you can bring the data together and how you can start to visualize it. And I'll give you some examples of some decisions that have been made just because they've been able to see the data. They could see the information and they could click that through. So let's go through some definitions, right? So connectors, API, application program interface. Sounds really complex. As we're moving to cloud-based solutions, a lot of data is stored in the cloud, and they pass that data back through an application program interface. So they share it across different programs. So it's like a power plug, goes across and sends it through. So that's all that really is. You don't really have to know what it all is, but it's just a bunch of code that grabs data, converts it into a format, and then they say, this is how, one program says, this is how I want the data, and the other program says, okay, I'll turn it into that same format so that they talk together. Okay? Measures are the under the hood formulas to get the data that represent exactly what you want. This is Austin saying such as gross profit. Gross profit has been a really difficult thing for him to put into Power BI. Stranger than that as it is. It's a different number. It falls in the data flow of a set of financials, and it's actually a different calculation. And it's really made it he's found it really complicated to do it. So he says that's hard for me. Everybody else seems to understand it, but they don't. They're created through DAX. DAX is a Excel formula on steroids. So it's an Excel formula combined with computer language. Not as complex as writing computer code, but it's an art. You need a data analyst to be able to do it. And that's what we sort of have started to build. And I'll explain why that is. The data model, and I'm going to show you a data model in a minute, refers to the structuring of the tables in a data set. So if you think about, right, we're grabbing all these databases, pulling them all together. And if I grabbed a database and one database described the client, the code, the table was called a client, and another data source came in and described that client that as a student, we create a relationship to say they mean the same thing, and therefore we combine that to one data source. So that's what we're doing in a model, and I'll show you how complex it is, but Power BI makes it easy for us because we can just drag and drop them, and it just builds our data model for us. The relationship is exactly what I said before. It's those relationships. It's combining the data model together. Row level security is the security within there. So when I said, if you're not on Microsoft and you're wanting to do some of these things, and we're thinking about where the data is and who owns it, row level security is controlled by the Microsoft security platform. So their federated security controls who can see what, where, and how, and we can use that to decide who in your business gets what data, even though it contains everything. And the beauty of the Microsoft security gives us that ability to easily decide, right, managers fall into here, and using groups and all of those sort of things. So the way that that's all happened is really simplified over the last 3 years. And then data source. So any database is a data source. Financial applications, CRM, Excel, SQL database, big data and government data. And John's data. So when we start to pull all of that together, we can then think, okay, well, like I'm sitting there going, wow, awesome data. Wouldn't you like to know how you're trending throughout the year to the goals and the policies you've set, rather than get to the end of the year and you give it to John and he goes, oh, you failed. So it'd be good to see that as a trend rather than finding out as you're going throughout the year. There's an example of a data model. Horrific, isn't it? Looks like a switchboard and everything's going on there. But what it is, it's just those flows, and my guys can look at it and they get it and they click it through, and it sort of builds itself. So it actually uses machine learning and robotic automation to start to build a lot of it. So it starts to learn things, and it's amazing what's going on in the background of of the Microsoft products that we've got access to and we don't use. I was involved with Microsoft. Because I was one of the first accountants in Australia to start using Xero, Microsoft said, and then I started a software development company, Microsoft said, we're really interested to find out what's going on because people aren't using all of our tools. We've got a real low adoption of all of the applications in Office 365. And I'm still seeing it now. You know, you might use Teams, you might use email, and then, you know, I said, you know, you've got Power Apps and robotic process automation built in. You've got all these things that you can do, and you don't know you've got that in your Office 365 subscription, that you can use all of these tools, because it just doesn't come out, you know, so people don't bring it up. So that's the other thing that we do. It's about the adoption of those tools. Anybody want to look at that anymore? And then when we get it all there, we say, okay, now we've got to create a graphical user interface. Do you know what that is? That's like what a software company spends millions and millions of dollars, because it looks awful. Everything used to look really bad back in the 80s and 90s. We had green screens and we'd push a button, F4 to do this, and all those really fun things. All the people old as me are nodding their head, remembering all of that. You know, and that's where they've spent lots and lots of dollars to improve that graphics so that it makes sense to you. And it's that change in where we're going, and we can use that tools to create better visualizations of the data. Okay? So what does it do? So it connects the data, links the data, takes it all and blends it together. So we did that, that's the model. Creates charts and graphs and helps you find insights within your school's data. So it helps you find information. So you can get drill throughs, you can go, you know, rather than having to come, you know, you can provide it to the CEO. You know, we've had discussion, what information do you give to the board, all of those sort of things. So when they come back and they're learning and asking questions, you can say, well, we'll give you this much of it, so you don't ask me too many questions, and you can go and find and learn about it, and you can drill through into that information. And you can provide that in there. So, and then you can share that with Power BI users within the school. That takes a little bit of time to understand and build your confidence up with. Because if I said, oh, let's do it, row level security, share it with everybody. We're doing it even at Ashfords. We're sort of probably 6 months into our journey of putting our KPIs in, getting our data, getting our reports, getting confidence with the data that's in there, monthly looking at that data. Now we've said, okay, we're confident with the data that we've got there. Now let's start sharing it with the managers so that they can do the drivers to get to the numbers at the end of the day. So we've got to identify, well, who's controlling those drivers, and what information do we want to give them to help them make informed decisions for you then to achieve your goals of your key performance indicators. Yeah? Yep. Cool. I'm going really quick, so it's okay. These are just to sort of like give you a bit of an idea what it looks like. So we can grab any of these areas. Now, how many are using like the Synergetics application? Nearly everybody? Yeah? What other ones that are? TAS. So I've been hunting around trying to find all these things, learning and that. Anything else used other than Synergetic, TAS?
PC schools, or whatever it's called now.
PC schools.
PC schools. It used to be called PC.
Yeah. You know, and I've done a little bit of research on Synergetic because we've had a chat with one particular school about what they're using and what they're getting through from there. But the most important thing is, you know, like we can pick up anything. Now that's school data. As I said, we can grab big data. We can grab any other information that we want to do to help you make those decisions that we're going through. So that's a KPI. That's a Power BI dashboard from Synergetic. So anybody using that? Jumped in and had a look. So if you have a look at their website, they say you can use their tools, and I'm going to talk to you about why you don't want to. One is that looks terrible. The other is I want to help you do it. But it's that user interface. So the other thing is why control your own data? Because we saw Xero before. Xero did released their data through Power BI. They realised everybody was going to Power BI to get their data and work within their data, so they stopped it. MYOB did the same. So MYOB had it, they were releasing their data to Power BI, they realised, oh hang on, everybody's going away from my application, and so they cut it. So when they say they cut it, they've created the tool, so they've created the connector. What we do is we build the connector, and so we use other people. So you build your own connector, you get your own data. So they've got them there, they've got 12 dashboards that they've created. But what if you wanted to add another data source to it? So you go, oh cool, I've got all that, I want to grab some of John's data and bring it in. You can't, because they control it. So it's sitting on their platform, it's not on your platform. It's not on your tenancy, and then you can't sort of really start to grow with it and build what you want to have to help you run your business. And what if you change an application? So they own your data, you build all your cool dashboards, and you say, I'm going to go to someone else, where there's talk of doing, and you lose it all, because they're controlling it. So but within Power BI, once you've extracted it out and it's sitting in the Power BI data source, it's yours. And that stays there. You change your application. Like we said before, another blend, line them all up, and it just flows. And you get all your trends and you get all your data that you need to see. I always say start with what you know. Create your reports. So start with your financial reports, your monthly reports, your board reports, and build your confidence up. Too many people go too fast. And we had the conversation with the school that we were talking to, and we've got, what we do is, I'm 30 years as an accountant, 10 years in IT. So I bring together, so being part of Ashfords is we bring together the concepts of accounting and technology, and we blend them together, so we create that void. So when I was with Microsoft, Microsoft asked me to talk at their public what is it, the seminar that they have, and the conversation was telling the IT industry they've got to get to and understand business processes and accounting and bring it together. And then we're saying to the accounting industry, you guys are going to get closer to the IT industry because that's the future. And there has been a struggle. There's been a struggle with that movement because people are worried about their revenue. They're going, oh, if I go automate everything and make it all easy and all that sort of stuff, well, where am I going to be as an accountant? If I go and let you control it and run it all, well, what am I going to do? So there's that, it's bringing that void together. And that was where I've seen that opportunity. And there's not many. I've seen that there's that niche is that difference of bringing together technology. And if you think about it, for a business, for a school, it's saying what processes are you doing and how can I automate them? How can I improve the systems and what you do? And Power BI is just one of those things that we're saying, you do your monthly board reports, how long does that take you to do? If we can do that and automate that it doesn't take you a day or 2 days to put together, it takes you a couple of minutes, and you build your confidence up with that, I'm saving time at that point. Then we start to say, what other things can we bring into it? And we'll go through some examples of that. So it's confidence, understand your data, then let the creativity flow. So one of my other engagements, we were engaged by the Institute of Chartered Accountants to build Power BI dashboards for the accounting industry. So I go into the accountants and I go, have a look at this. And they go, oh, freaking hell. You're going to put me out of work. I'm not going to have anything to do. So they reluctance to grab that part of it. So then we said, well, what do you want to do? And they went too far trying to grab big data and they lost track of it. They started to think, oh, okay, well, one decision we've got to make is I've got a hairdresser and can you help us identify where they should open their next store? And we said, yeah, let's go through some scenarios, let's put some formulas together. Let's plot it on a map and let's see if we can come up with some things that match your demographic of where you live, where your the hairdresser is, and put over there. It was too fast. They weren't ready for it. Even where, like I'm 5 years into really sort of working into it, and it's even now I'm really only just starting to think about big data and all of those sort of things. Microsoft used to do a scenario where they went to Hills clotheslines, and they tried to help them predict the price of steel in 5 years' time. So, cool data, but they go, great, got that, see you later, and they never use it for anything else again. It's a getting to use it day to day, looking at it on your phone. I'm doing a pub at the moment. I said to him, what do you want to know? He goes, can you give me that every day? Done. Yes, that's amazing. Can you do my other 3 pubs? Because all I want to see is that every day. These 5 key indicators that he wanted to see every day on his phone. Wakes up, cool, we made money yesterday, I'm good. Other than that, he was ringing them, going, have we got the numbers, where is it at? He hadn't put it in. All those sort of things, relying on people to do things. He wasn't getting the information as he needed to on a day-to-day basis. Now, you're probably not going to have that scenario, but you might have some sort of trends that you're looking at where you say, we want to see some information more on a more regular basis.
Trev, I'm just mindful of time. So
Cool.
just-
I thought I was going fast.
You are
I'm
going
slowing
really,
down.
really
Uh,
fast.
It was Ryan's fault.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll just blame Ryan.
So it's not just dashboards and reports. We can use that data. We can analyse data. We can look at data insights. We can follow trends. So things of where we're looking at our KPIs, we can trend a lot quicker than waiting month to month. We can see trends throughout a month, and we can pick up where things and identify issues and jump onto them quicker than we can. Outliers, we can put maps over data and sort of see, like you could do your student base, where they're at. But we talked about it, bus routes and all of those sort of things you can put in there. You can export data. So, we would like to be able to go, rather than you have to fill in the form and do it all that, we can create an export of data out of your database that you can control, and it can just be pushed straight in there. Again, saving time. Maybe then speed it up. Quarterly rather than,
Yeah, monthly.
Huh?
Monthly.
Monthly, just bang, it goes off. Duk, 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 duk. You don't have to, and that gives those trends are flowing through. And then machine learning and Power Automate, just want to put that on the bottom there because they are some super tools that are available to help you with many different things you've got to do within your business. So machine learning it's learning, so using machine learning to watch what's going on and replicate processes, and Power Automate is using or then going in and sort of using those processes to automatically do functions within the business. So examples, we've got to every month put our workflows and that together. We use Power BI, we use Planner to do that. We've created a workflow that automatically goes and creates all the tasks based on the data they've got, so that just goes and populates all the tasks for them so they don't have to key them all in one by one. We use Power Automate for emails that come in, so we go in and we've connected an email that comes into our office for support at digital, automatically flows that into a planner, allocates that as a task to one of my staff. Then I know they tick it off and it gets done. So for me, that's one. They're real small examples of Power Automate, and it's fairly unlimited what you can generate with that. So I want to give you a real quick look, if you've never seen one before, of a demo. Okay, so when you think about the visuals, so we spend a lot of time on those visuals. So if you look at the dashboard that Synergetica put together, and then you look at something like this one makes a lot of sense. So me looking at John's waterfall going, that makes sense to people, I'll incorporate those things into it so that we say that's what people are understanding, so let's get things to follow those same trends. We talk to different business people about what you like. So we're doing a non-profit at the moment, and they said, we understand the speedos. So if I've got a visual and I can see a speedo going, and I've got my targets 100 k's an hour, and I understand I'm getting close to it. Those sort of things that they can see. So net profit loss, where things are at, your creditors, your debtors, that's just a snapshot of where things are at within the business. Now, we were hoping to do a school, but we found it was going to just take us weeks to de-identify the data, whereas we've already got some demos of businesses that we've de-identified. So hence why we do that. So this is connected in real time. This is updating with APIs by the hour, with like Excel files and that we set the times that we update. So we can say, we want it to update 8, 12, 4, 8, 12, or some things we say the data's only going to go and that just happens at once a day. So we can update that information as it goes through. But I'm just going to show you just some things that we've been building in terms of what works. So if we do this, that makes no sense to most people. But if we do a visual of it, and some people would like to go and have a look at that. But if we do a dashboard on profits, and then we've got trends and graphs, and you can go, oh yeah, we're going okay, we're doing this. This is where each month we're losing money, we're making money. We can say our target is to get to here. So we can see information. To you, looking at that makes no sense. But to the business owner, it makes sense. Is that sort of like, until you see your own data in here, it's all just graphs and numbers, and it doesn't make any sense to me. And that's why it would be good to do a school, but even then, we can click on that. Those projection analysis and all of those sort of things, we've created little tools and sliders, John, that we should get together and talk about, where you can put a slider where you can say, based on budget, based on last year, I want to put a ratio and say, not sure if I'm going to make budget, but I'm going to be close to last year. So you can change your filters to see where your projections and so forth are going to be. So we've created those sort of things. Debtors was one thing before, so debtor analysis. Best paying customers, worst paying customers. Standard, where do I sit with all my debtors are going through? What are my debtor days doing? How am I improving on that? There should be some automation around your debtors. We see massive improvements where we can get debtor collection managed automatically through systems and processes. So it automatically goes out 7 days after it's due, 14 days, whatever the policy is. And then when they ring up and go, it happens in a fraction of the time it takes for someone to ring up and do those things, but also it handles probably 80% of them, and then the others you've got time then to deal with and work with on that. You've got all your filters that you need to do. So filtering enables you to look at last month's, any date period that you want to look at. So you've got ultimate control over your data and within your visuals to see what you want to see, because in the back of the database, in here, is everything. So we did a conversion of a business using an old accounting system. We couldn't get their list of debtors outstanding at the 30th of June of the year we were rolling it over. So we just got all the invoices for 19 years, all of the payments for 19 years, and we ran a process over it and it rebuilt it for us immediately. But we had 19 years worth of data to create it, to recreate it. It was easier than going, it might only be 5, might only be 2. We did that. Within that business that we were working on, by bringing in processes, automatic processes to collect debtors, we've seen an increase in their debtor collections massively, because they said, big problem, debtors are way out. They had never looked at it before. They never understood what it meant with the days. They've never gone back and benchmarked it against what should we be achieving. Then they said, now we need to put some processes in place to improve our debtors. So those sort of things came in because of the data they saw. I won't go forever, but that's just giving you some examples of the hundreds of, there's the visual that we've done with the projection modifier. So how are we tracking? Based on budget, I can slide it across. I'm going to go 63%, 37% based on last year. So based on budget, don't think I'll get there, but I should be closer to last year, and it will change your level of your projection. Can I decrease my expenses? Can I do those sort of things? And this is just us going, listening. What would you like to see? What do you need to see? And what we do is we've got our standard, and we'll change for that. We'll build a standard bunch of reports, and then we'll go and say, what other things do you want to have? And then work with you to build other ones.
Trev, we are sitting at 10 minutes.
Okay. Last thing.
It's Ryan's fault.
Last thing. This is a real world example of a business that was in financial trouble, actually had liquidators appointed, receivers appointed, decision was getting made, do we continue on? we had a meeting with the advisor, and they were looking at how do we turn the business around to get it profitable. There was one business line that the directors and they felt that business line was making them lose money. The sales team were saying, no. That's not where we lose our money. And they were getting misinformation from the sales team because the sales team didn't want to drop that product line because that's where they were making their commission. So the commission model was built all wrong. They were losing $80,000 a month. They now make, within 2 months they were making $150,000 a month. They've now changed their whole business focus to the divisions that were making profit, and now they're up to nearly $300,000 a month profit. That was a real world situation where decisions needed to be made in 28 days or we're shutting the business down. Pressure coming from everywhere, people wanting to keep their jobs, difficult decisions needed to be made, and we were able to provide that information in a 10 minute snap. And they saw the real data. That's when they saw the real data, and they said, that decision is done now. Dropped it. So it's that whole thing of you've got lots of data, how to understand the data, and we can build the models for you. We can bring in other data as you learn your financial data, as you learn and build confidence around it, and gradually go. The Dean of the University of Technology in Sydney will go off on, he told me that he said Power BI can get rid of auditing. You know.
Don't say that, Trevor.
I knew it wasn't going to happen. There's no way in insurance. It might happen in 20 years, but they're thinking over here. Last example where, Louise, this is one you'll like. So we put together a data model for a dog food company, right? So we actually went to a business through the Institute of Chartered Accountants. They said, let's sponsor a data model. We'll build it for them. We'll do that. What do you want to know? This is a dog food company. Well, could we get information on every dog registration in Australia? Right, so we did that, put together. Now let's have a look at the data. What do you want to know? All right, well, what dog registrations are in each council? Yep, here we go. All right, what's the most popular dog in each council? Can you give us that? Yep, there we go. Latrobe Valley's most popular dog was a red heeler. Down in Torquay, the most popular dog was a golden retriever. They changed, on that information, their whole marketing plan. And they put a different dog on the front of each different packaging based on the most popular dog in that area, because they never had that data before. So that's the power of that data that they can do. But until you're asking questions, I don't know. I think Austin came in this morning. Yeah, I built this one for you because I heard you talking about it the other day. I thought this might be a good one for you to use. So he's listening, going, what do you want to hear?
Do people know who Austin is?
Oh, sorry. Austin's
No
one of
one
my
knows.
he's my data analyst.
I thought it was Austin Powers.
Yeah, Austin. He is a bit like that.
It's his alter
He's got
ego.
purple hair, and, but he's our data analyst. So he's going in and building all their models and putting everything together. So he's your combination of, he's learning accounting and he's applying it to his tech and computer programming. Any questions? I was going to do a workshop on what you want, but we won't go there.
So Trevor, where's the data sit? So if it's XYZ school, if it's my school, for instance, and I'm on the board of, we have a Microsoft account and the data sits there, or
Yeah, so it sits in your in Azure in your platform. So part of your Power BI subscription, which is $12 a month per user, you get an Azure server effectively, and it sits in there.
So that's where all my
In your Microsoft.
In your
application.
Microsoft application, not in Synergetics, not in Ashfords, not in all those. And we really encourage that because I'm a big advocate of owning your data, and especially as we're moving to cloud products and those sort of
so it's
things.
the same database that all my Office 365 stuff and all my client stuff all sits in there.
Yeah, it's sitting in the back of that. Just it's become so cheap. They basically give it all away. They just say we want you to do it and use it, and they'll probably increase the price one day, but it's never going to be at that level. But that's what I always say. Make sure it's in your tenancy, because you might change accountants, you might change subscribers, you might change all those things, and it needs to be with you.
And 365 is all housed, data warehoused in Australia now?
No.
No?
So yes, but no. They back it up overseas. So you've got to check most of it's stored in Australia, but you've got to check those policies to make sure you're not breaching any government regulations and so forth on that. You can say, I only want it to be here, but they will always back up
The
overseas.
schools will be concerned about that, especially with children, information on kids.
So if you're worried about trust and security of Microsoft, go to their trust application. They've got it all, hundreds and hundreds of policies. When I say if you're doing Google, go and read their policy, because don't use Google, because Google say clearly that they own your data and can replicate your data. Microsoft say we are trusted custodians of your data. We don't own your data, and we will never do anything without your data, with your data without explicit permission. But Google's policies say different. So that was the first thing that the Institute of Chartered Accountants said to me is, we've got to check that.
Were there any other questions for Trevor?
Super fast.
Super
You've
fast, super
we've got our
speedy.
details in there.
Yep.
If you'd like us to come and have a chat, we can come and have a chat. Firstly and best dressed, I'd love to do some profiling and sort of talk about some modelling that we could do for a school, and do a bit of a case study to work within that, so we for this first person we start working with within a school database, we'll sort of do it together.